Chapter 11. The Modern Watchers and the New Forbidden Knowledge. For centuries, the Book of Enoch lay in Ethiopia's monasteries as both a record and a warning, a reminder of what happens when heavenly knowledge is twisted into weapons. The Watchers descended with secrets not meant for human hands, and the world before the flood collapsed under the weight of that corruption. But if you think their story ended in the deep prison described in Enoch, look again. The spirit of the Watchers, the same rebellion, the same seduction of forbidden knowledge, still lives. Only now it wears a different face. In our age, the tools have changed, but the pattern has not. Where the Watchers taught the ancient world metalwork, sorcery, and genetic corruption, our generation is unlocking technologies that carry the same potential for destruction. We call it progress, but in prophetic language, it is the return of an old playbook. Artificial intelligence now learns faster than any human mind, absorbing the sum of human knowledge and then creating knowledge of its own. Genomic editing promises to perfect human DNA, altering traits, removing diseases, but also opening the door to altering what it means to be human. Biological weapons, designed in hidden labs, have the power to end millions of lives without firing a single shot. Individually, each of these could be a tool for good. Together, they form a dangerous cocktail of power, power that, in the wrong hands, could erase the line between creation and creator. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers' gifts to humanity as knowledge that led astray. It was not the information itself that was evil, but its use outside of God's boundaries. The same is true now. AI could feed the hungry or enslave thought itself. Genetic engineering could heal or build something no longer fully human. Advanced weaponry could protect or annihilate with the push of a button. This is why the Ethiopian church reads Enoch not as a relic of ancient myth, but as a prophetic lens for the present. The parallels are too sharp to ignore. The ancient Watchers crossed a divine boundary. Today, our scientists and innovators stand on the edge of similar lines. And the question is not, can we cross them, but should we? The rebellion of the Watchers was not just about knowledge. It was about authority. They did not want to serve under God's order. They wanted to set their own. This is the same spirit that drives much of our technological ambition today. The belief that we can become the architects of our own evolution, that we can transcend our humanity without the God who gave it. Here the wave peak strikes. The ancient rebellion is now in silicon and steel. The divine boundaries that once existed in heaven and on earth are now being tested in laboratories and data centers. And just like before, the world applauds, unaware that the same pattern of corruption is repeating. Prophetically, this is the danger. The return of forbidden knowledge in our generation will not look like angels descending. It will look like innovation conferences, medical breakthroughs, and AI-powered revolutions. It will come to us wrapped as solutions to our problems, just as Satan came to Adam, disguised as a blessing. The West may have forgotten Enoch's warnings, but the patterns are playing out exactly as he described. The temptation is not only to use this knowledge, but to worship it, to treat technology as our savior, our healer, our God. And just as in the days of Noah, the corruption is accelerating. The question is not whether judgment will come, it is how far the world will go before it arrives. From Ethiopia's mountains to the global stage, the thread of prophecy is unbroken. We are living in the echo of an ancient rebellion. And if the parallels hold, the next act will not be one of quiet progress. It will be one of open confrontation between the kingdoms of this world and the kingdom of God. And that confrontation is already foreshadowed in the last book of the Bible. Chapter 12. Revelation's Black Messiah and the Fall of Babylon. The final book of the Bible, Revelation, pulls back the curtain on the climax of the story that began in Eden. It is not merely a series of visions, It is the final act of a war that has spanned all of human history. And in its opening chapter, John gives us a description of the risen Christ, unlike any portrait hanging in Western churches. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. Revelation 1:14-15. The Ethiopian tradition has long held this description literally, treating the wool-like hair and the burnished brass skin as real physical characteristics. In doing so, they preserved an image of the Messiah that defied the sanitized, Europeanized depictions that later dominated art. This was not the pale, fragile Christ of medieval paintings, but a figure rooted in the earth, radiant in glory, and unmistakably fierce. This Christ stands in contrast to the world system described in Revelation as Babylon. Babylon is more than an ancient city. It is a symbol of the global network of oppression, greed, and idolatry that spans from Nimrod's tower to the present age. It is a system that seduces nations with wealth, enslaves souls through desire, and persecutes the righteous who refuse its mark. Revelation portrays Babylon as a merchant queen, intoxicated with her own power, clothed in luxury, and drunk on the blood of the saints. And just as the Watchers built cities of rebellion before the flood, so Babylon builds an empire that unites politics, economics, and religion into a counterfeit kingdom. But God's people are not abandoned in this system. John is shown a vision of 144,000 sealed servants of God, 12,000 from each tribe of Israel. Who are they? Western interpretations often treat them as symbolic, yet Ethiopian and certain Hebraic traditions suggest they may be literal descendants of the tribes, scattered and hidden among the nations. Their identity lost through exile, just as the children of Eden's covenant lost theirs. These could include communities long disconnected from their heritage, yet marked in heaven for this appointed time. The sealing of the 144,000 is a sign that God's covenant people will stand in the midst of the storm. It is both a promise of protection and a summons to faithfulness when the world system demands compromise. Then comes the battle that all prophecy has been building toward, Armageddon. Here, the Black Messiah of Revelation does not come as the suffering servant of the Gospels, but as the conquering king. His robe is dipped in blood, not his own this time, but as a sign of victory over his enemies. On his head are many crowns, and on his thigh is written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The armies of heaven follow him, clothed in white, riding on horses. The beast and the kings of the earth gather to make war, but they fall in a moment, defeated not by nuclear power or human armies, but by the word that proceeds from his mouth. Babylon collapses in a single hour. Her merchants wail, her music silenced, her lights extinguished. Here is the wave peak that ties the entire story together. From Adam's exile to Christ's kingdom, the war ends. The curse that began in the garden is finally broken. The deceiver who tempted Eve, who corrupted the Watchers, who seduced nations into Babylon's web, is bound and cast into the lake of fire. A new heaven and a new earth appear. The tree of life, once barred by flaming swords, now stands in the center of the city, its leaves for the healing of the nations. There is no temple, for God and the Lamb are its light. The exile is over. The inheritance is restored. But one final call remains, to choose now which kingdom we belong to, before the king returns to claim what is his. Chapter 13. Final call. Return to the inheritance. From the moment Adam and Eve stepped out of Eden's gate, the world has been living in exile. The journey we've traced, from the cave of treasures to the days of Enoch and the Watchers, through the cleansing of the flood into Ethiopia's mountains, and finally to the visions of Revelation, has been one unbroken story. It is the history of a family line meant to preserve a covenant, the story of how that covenant was attacked, nearly erased, yet guarded by a faithful remnant until the appointed time. Eden was where we lost our inheritance. Enoch stood against those who tried to corrupt it. The flood preserved it. Ethiopia guarded its records. Revelation promises its restoration. The thread runs straight through history. But here is the sobering truth. Threads can be cut and inheritance can be forgotten. The message for us today is not simply to admire the story from a distance. It is to recognize that we are living in its final chapters. The patterns we've seen in ancient times, the lure of forbidden knowledge, the theft of identity, the seduction of false blessings, are not distant history. They are here, dressed in modern clothes, speaking our language, promising the same things the serpent promised in the beginning. You can be like God. To the older generation listening, perhaps you have seen these patterns play out over decades. You've watched the world change at a pace unthinkable in your youth. Traditions have been eroded, truth has been redefined, faith has been treated as outdated. And yet, the prophetic record tells us this is exactly how the final act unfolds. The question is, will we be awake when it does? Returning to the inheritance begins with remembering who we are. We are not accidents of history or mere survivors of a broken world. We are the descendants of a covenant that began in the garden. That covenant is not written in our DNA alone, but in the image of God stamped on every soul. To forget that is to remain in the modern cave, alive yet living in the dark. The book of Adam and Eve teaches us that exile is a place of preparation, not permanent defeat. The book of Enoch warns that the enemy's strategies repeat themselves generation after generation. Revelation shows us that the war will end, but not with negotiations, with the return of the rightful king. So how do we return to the inheritance? We do it by rejecting the counterfeit blessings that promise comfort but lead to bondage, by guarding the truth we've been given, even if the world mocks or ignores it, by seeking the wisdom of God over the knowledge that puffs up and destroys, and by aligning ourselves with the King, who will not only end the exile, but restore the garden in a form more glorious than it was in the beginning. There is also this: the story is not yet complete. Across deserts, under monasteries, and in vaults beneath ancient churches, there are still texts waiting to be uncovered, records of the earliest generations, writings that may shed more light on the first war of humanity. If God has preserved them this long, perhaps it is because they will be needed in the days ahead. And so we arrive at the closing wave peak, a question that is both personal and prophetic. The first exile is ending. Will you return? This is not a call to nostalgia. It is not a romantic longing for the past. It is a summons to step into the identity and authority you were always meant to have, to stand against the darkness as Adam was meant to, as Enoch did, as the 144,000 will. When the King comes, the gates will open again, not to let us out, but to welcome us home. And in that moment, the inheritance will no longer be a promise. It will be our reality. Until then, the choice is ours.